As you like it. About Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, regarded as the greatest writer in the English language, was born in Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire, England, around 23 April 1564. He was the third of 8 children born to John and Mary Shakespeare. Shakespeare was a poet, playwright, and dramatist. He is often known as England's national poet and the Bard of Avon. 38 plays, 154 sonnets, 2 long narrative poems, and several other poems are attributed to him. Shakespeare's plays have been translated into every major existing language and are performed more often than those of any other playwright.
Duke Frederick. He has usurped his brother, Duke Senior, from the dukedom. He is cruel and has an unfull temper. He also banishes Rosalind to the forest of Anden, due to his hatred for her father.
Orlando. He is a handsome young man who has had no education or training. However, he proves himself to be a gentleman when he takes care of his aging servant, protects his brother from a lioness, and wins the wrestling match.
Rosalind. She is the daughter of the usurped duke. She is strong-willed, clever, and independent. She is a constant companion to her cousin Celia. She uses her exile as a means to take control of her life.
Duke Senior. He is the usurped and banished duke. He now lives in the forest of Arden with his councillors. He is kind, hearted, and generous. He lives in the forest content, happy, and celebrating life.
As you like it. There was a small kingdom in France ruled by a usurper, a man who had taken the throne away from its rightful owner, his eldest brother, and had then banished him.
The banished duke, having nothing left to call his own, decided to take refuge in the nearby forest of Arden, but as happens with all noblemen, the duke's courtiers decided to go with him to the forest and stay with him during his period of exile. They lived there like Robin Hood and his merry men.
They found new ways of amusing themselves, and making merry reciting poetry, and talking about how the winter winds, though cold and harsh, were better than men, who appeared to be friendly but stabs you in the back.
Now, the banished duke had a daughter called Rosalind. Duke Frederick, the usurper, when banishing his elder brother, did not allow Rosalind to go with him, as he wanted her to remain as a companion to his own daughter Celia.
The young girls were great friends, and not once did they let the relationship between their fathers affect them.
Celia knew of the injustice that had been meted out to Rosalind, and whenever her friend was upset and remembered her father, Celia would try to cheer her up.
One day, Celia was trying to cheer her friend Rosalind when, suddenly, a messenger from the Duke arrived and informed the girls that a wrestling match was about to start, and if they were interested, they could come along and watch it.
Celia immediately thought that this would take Rosalind's mind off her misery and agreed to go.
However, when they reached the wrestling pit, what they saw failed to amuse them.
A huge man was about to wrestle with a thin young man who looked rather inexperienced.
The Duke summoned the two girls and asked them to talk to his young lad, and begged him to pull out of the fight before he was killed.
Celia and Rosalind immediately agreed to do this. Good did and went over to the man. First, Celia tried to persuade him, but when Rosalind spoke to him, her words had a different effect. Far from walking away from the fight, he now wanted to prove his worth to this beautiful lady, and he calmly remarked, "I'm sorry to deny such fair and excellent ladies anything. If I am killed, there is one dead who is willing to die. I shall do my friends no wrong, for I have none to lament me."
Soon the wrestling match started.
Celia prayed for the young man to come out of the ordeal unhurt, but Rosalind was pained by the young man's words of death and how he was friendless in this world.
She found his situation as unfortunate as her own, and at that moment she fell in love with the young wrestler. However, in the wrestling pit, a different story was unfolding.
Encouraged by the kind words of the two ladies, the young wrestler was starting to overcome the giant.
Within minutes, the match was over and the young man stood over his opponent, victorious.
Duke Frederick wanted to know the name of the young man and about his family so that he could take him under his protection.
The young man replied that his name was Orlando, and that he was the youngest son of the now deceased Sir Roland de Boys.
Duke Frederick was most upset upon hearing this, because it was a known fact that Sir Roland de Boys had been a great admirer of his elder brother, the banished Duke.
His appreciation for the youth turned to hostility and simply remarked, "I wish you had been the son of any other man."
Rosalind, though, was delighted to hear about Orlando's lineage.
It made her feel closer to him, learning that their fathers had been good friends.
As the Duke left, Rosalind and Celia immediately went up to Orlando and started to converse. Before leaving, Rosalind took off her gold chain and gave it to Orlando to remember her by.
When the two girls were alone in the chambers, Rosalind could not stop talking about Orlando.
Sensing something brewing in Rosalind's heart for the gallant man, Celia asked her whether she was in love with him.
Rosalind merely replied that she was fond of him because his father had been a good friend of her own father.
To that, Celia remarked, "But does it therefore follow that you should love his son dearly? For then I ought to hate him, for my father hated his father, yet I do not hate Orlando." Meanwhile, Frederick was enraged at having met Sir Roland the boy's son, and being reminded of his elder brother and all his well-wishers who had followed the rightful duke to the forest, rather than be members of Frederick's court.
His anger was soon directed toward Rosalind, who now more than ever reminded him of her father.
So while the girls were talking about Orlando, Duke Frederick stormed into the room and ordered Rosalind to leave his house. Celia tried to intervene, but her father's orders were irreversible.
When Celia realized that her unjust father could not change his mind, she decided to go with Rosalind to the forest, leaving the house that very night.
But there was one problem. They realized that it would be unsafe for them to venture into the forest alone, and so Rosalind decided to dress as a boy, while Celia would pretend to be a simple country lass.
They would say that they were brother and sister, which would keep them safe in the forest.
Rosalind took the name Ganymede, and Celia called herself Aliena.
Finally, the two girls were ready to leave the house.
They took as much money and jewels as they could lay their hands on.
They walked a long way before they finally reached the forest of Anden.
It was only then that the two girls, now brother and sister, realized how arduous the road ahead would be, for there would be no more inns for them to stay at and nowhere to get food.
Celia, or Alina as she was now called, was so tired that she refused to walk any further. Rosalind, or rather Ganymede, was also very tired, but she could not show it because she was supposed to be a man.
Finally, after many agonizing moments, they met a poor little shepherd boy passing the same way.
Ganymede, in his most manly voice, asked the shepherd if he knew a small house they could stay in. To which the shepherd replied that his own master's house was just about to be sold, and perhaps Ganymede and his sister could purchase it.
So he led them to the house in the village, which they bought along with some supplies, and the shepherd stayed on as an errand boy.
They moved into the house and decided to start looking for the Duke in the next day.
In the meantime, there were certain developments in the town.
Orlando, son of the deceased Sir Roland de Boys, was having problems of his own.
His elder brother, Oliver, who was left in charge of taking care of him, had given him no attention his whole life.
Far from enrolling him in school, Oliver did not even bother to stop his brother from taking part in wrestling match.
That was why Orlando had confided in Rosalind about how he had nothing to live for and that no one would even mourn his death.
Oliver had learned of Orlando's heroic feat at the wrestling match that day, but instead of being proof of his brother's success, he could not help feelings of pain or jealousy.
So he decided that at night, when Orlando was asleep, he would set fire to his room.
But as always happens to evil doors and all servants of the house, overheard Oliver's plans.
He was loyal to Sir Roland the Boys and was also very fond of Orlando, and so when Orlando came home that evening, he told him about Oliver's plan and begged the boy to run away.
He gave him all the money he had saved while working for Sir Rowland the Boys, and asked Orlando to take him with him, because he did not want to be left alone with Oliver.
Without wasting any time, Orlando and his faithful servant left for the forest of Arden, where they thought they would be safe.
But once they were in the forest, Orlando realized that the servant's money would be of no use to him.
There was nowhere he could buy food, and so he decided to leave his tired servant in a shady group and go in search of something to eat.
Though he walked for quite some distance, he found nothing.
Suddenly, Orlando heard voices and started walking in that direction.
He saw that there was a small crowd gathered, settling down to have dinner.
Being unable to resist all the tempting food that was before him, Orlando drew his sword and jumped before the party, yelling, "Out with it, all your food!"
It was actually the old Duke and his banished ministers who were just about to start their meal.
The Duke looked quizzically at Orlando and told him that they were not savages and he was welcome to join them for something to eat.
But Orlando said that he had an old companion with him, and he would not touch a morsel until he was fed.
So the Duke asked some of his men to go with Orlando and bring back his friend. Slowly, Orlando's old faithful servant regained his strength.
Now that all was well between the Duke and Orlando, the Duke asked the young man who he was and what he was doing in the forest.
When he learned Orlando's identity, he immediately took him under his protection. From that day on, Orlando and his old servant were part of the Duke's entourage.
One day, in the forest, Ganymede was surprised to see Rosalind's name carved on the tree trunks.
The whole forest was full of her name. The brother and sister also found several love sonnets marked on the various trees where Rosalind's name was carved.
While they were still trying to guess who could be master of such work, they stumbled upon Orlando.
Ganymede saw that the gold chain she had given him when she was the fair Rosalind was still around his neck.
The three became friends. Orlando, of course, did not know that Ganymede was actually the lovely Rosalind who had stolen his heart, so he kept telling him about the woman of his dreams and how he would die without her.
Ganymede also kept up the pretense and started playing a little game of his own.
He told Orlando that he had a certain plan which would certainly solve all of his problems.
He asked Orlando to come to his cottage every day, where he must try to woo the noble Ganymede, who would pretend that he was Rosalind and would thwart all of Orlando's attempts.
Ganymede was certain that Orlando would soon forget all about Rosalind.
However, when the game began, it did not look as if Ganymede would be successful.
Orlando came to Ganymede's house every day and played the game of make-believe.
Even though this exercise did not make him forget his love for Rosalind, it did give him an opportunity to say what he felt in his heart.
And this also helped Ganymede, as Rosalind, to confirm her love for Orlando.
While pursuing the matters of his own heart, Ganymede made no attempt to let his father know who he really was.
Learning about the Duke from Orlando, Ganymede did go to meet him once, but he refrained from telling him who he was, because he thought that his father was very happy in this new surrounding.
One fine morning, as Orlando made his way to Ganymede's house, he saw his brother, Oliver, lying by a tree, asleep. Suddenly, he saw that a lioness was sitting close by, ready to pounce on Oliver when he awoke.
First, Orlando thought about leaving his cruel brother to his fate, but soon, brotherly affection overcame him and started to fight with the lioness.
During the scuffle, Oliver awoke to find that his brother was trying to save him at the cost of his own life.
But before Orlando could slay the lion, the hungry animal managed to injure his arm.
Oliver immediately tried to nurse his brother back to health, and so the two brothers were reconciled.
Orlando asked his brother to go to the house of Ganymede to tell him that they would not be able to come because of his injury.
Oliver immediately went and told Ganymede everything that had happened.
He also introduced himself as Orlando's elder brother and told them the whole story.
Ganymede and Alina were content to know that the two brothers were now reunited.
The genuine sorrow that Oliver felt for his brother and about their past relationship had a deep impact on Alina.
She immediately fell in love with Oliver, and Oliver could not help but stare at the pretty Alina and also fell in love with her.
But as Ganymede was told about Orlando's injury, he collapsed to the ground.
This made Oliver wonder about Ganymede, as no man would faint upon hearing such news.
On recovering, Ganymede made up a story about how he was pretending to be Rosalind and therefore acted as if he had fainted, but Oliver was not convinced.
He went back to Orlando and told him about Ganymede collapsing and how he had fallen in love with Aliena. He went on to say that if they were to get married, he will stay with his beloved Aliena in the forest and live like a simple shepherd for the rest of his life.
Orlando immediately arranged for the marriage to be held the next day.
He even went to the Duke and invited him and all his ministers to the wedding.
Later that day, when Orlando met Ganymede, he told him about his wish to be married to Rosalind the same day as Alina and Oliver were to get married.
Ganymede told him that if such were the desire in his heart, he would see to it that Rosalind came to the wedding and married Orlando.
Orlando readily agreed to Ganymede's proposal.
He went and told the Duke about the whole episode, and both waited for the next day to come, so that they could once again see their beloved Rosalind.
The next day was the day of the wedding between Alina and Oliver.
The Duke and Orlando were anxiously waiting to see a miracle happen, and it soon did. Instead of Ganymede and Alina, Rosalind and Celia arrived. The Duke and Orlando were overjoyed to see Rosalind, who wasted no time in telling both men everything that they had done since leaving home.
While all the people in the forest of Anden were reconciling with each other, a messenger arrived from the city.
He said that Duke Frederick had given up on his claim to the dukedom and left it for his elder brother, to whom it rightfully belonged.
They were informed that after his daughter ran away and come to the forest, Frederick had grown more leaning towards his vanished elder brother.
In fact, he was on his way to the forest with a huge army to kill everyone when he met a hermit who told him he was making a huge mistake. From that moment, he decided to give up his dukedom. So it was finally a rather happy moment for all the people present.
The Duke got his dukedom back. Orlando and Rosalind were married. Oliver and Selina were married, and Orlando and Oliver were reconciled.
It was a great day in the forest of Arden.